share the screen. So first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to our first festival, mini genomic festival. And we're hoping that this will be the first of a number of festivals that we will be holding over the next couple of years. So thank you very much to everybody for coming along. We're going to be recording this, and the recording will be available on the Southeast Genomics website for at least a month, but we may keep it there for longer. So just to say, if everybody could mute themselves as they come in, you're very welcome to keep your cameras on if you wish to, but just make sure that you are muted so that we have a smooth working of this. So I'm going to kick off. I am Frances Elmsley. I'm a clinical geneticist at St George's, and I'm the clinical director for the Southeast Genomic Medicine Service Alliance. And we have today presentations from a number of colleagues on the themes of cardiology, neurology and renal, and that's going to be showcasing some of the projects that we've been working on for the last year. And I'm really pleased to see some people joining who are very much part of this alliance as well, and integral to what we've achieved so far. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on the alliance, and then I will be handing over to my colleagues to take you through a little bit more about the projects. So I think I have control. So hopefully this is all going to work well. I'm just waiting. I think there's a little bit of delay on the slides moving forward, so I'm just waiting to get to my first slide. Hopefully this is going to work. What is everybody else seeing? Makeda, what are you seeing? I'm still seeing the initial slide.
Yeah, so am I.
Okay, it's just moved on now. Let's see. The other thing I should have said, okay, excellent, is that if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will see if we can address any questions specific to the presentation at the end of the presentation. But if we don't have time, we have good amount of time at the end to address those questions. So I think hopefully most people on this call are aware that NHS England has introduced a national NHS genomic medicine service, and the aim of this service is to embed genomics into routine NHS care. And to deliver the genomic medicine service, they first created 7 regional genomic laboratory hubs, and then subsequently created these structures called the Genomic Medicine Service Alliances. And it's that vehicle that we are talking about today. And the aims of the service are, first of all, to deliver a national genomic testing service through the labs. And the GMSAs were established back in December 2020 to enable the multi-professional workforce to use genomics. And that's hopefully what we are beginning to achieve. So there are 7 genomic laboratory hubs, as people may be aware, and these laboratory hubs now deliver their services through the National Genomic Test Directory. And the aim of the test directory is to ensure that there is equitable testing across the regions, so that a patient living on the South Coast is able to access the same genomic test as a patient living in the Peak District, for example. This is still a new structure. The labs have been consolidated into these 7 hubs, and that is still embedding. So it's still very much a work in progress. Sorry, I'm having problems with moving these forward, but essentially there we go. In addition to testing for rare disease, there's the laboratory hubs also are testing for cancer, and this is both germline testing, so for people at risk of inherited cancers, but also somatic cancer testing. And this is with the aim of transforming molecular testing for cancer provision. Our geography is that the yellow bit down in the bottom, and so the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hub is the regional hub for South London, Kent, Surrey and Sussex. And then from December 2020, the alliances were formed and they map to the same geographies as the genomic laboratory hubs. And this is very much the alliance, the aim of the alliances is very much about integrating genomics into clinical care, ensuring that there are standard pathways of care for individuals who have genetic disease or potentially a cancer. So we have in the Southeast established our alliance, and we have developed our infrastructure, which is now pretty well established over the last year. So although the alliances were designated in December 2020, they really only started to get going from March 2021, and so we're coming to the end of the first year. Sorry, my slides are not moving on, so I'm just wondering whether I should, yeah, I might hand back control, Makeda, shall I?
Just tell me when.
Yeah, so yes, so if you could, lovely, if you could move on to the next slide after this one. Brilliant. Okay, so this just tells you a little bit more about the Genomic Medicine Service Alliances, and I think the key areas, actually, the third and fourth of these, so around transformation and workforce development. And so we've been very much working on transformative projects, but also linked into education, working very closely with Health Education England. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So the priorities were set for us for 21-22, and there are a number of other priorities. Some of these will continue into 22-23, and there are additional priorities that are coming along as well. So for 21-22, one of our priorities was completion of the 100,000 Genomes project. We're pretty much there with that. There is some, the tail end of the project is continuing, but we're almost there with completion. And then there are some broader aims which look at retaining, building patient and public trust in genomics, looking at partnerships across the geography, using genomics to improve healthcare, embedding clinical leadership and supporting multi-professional workforce programs, also thinking about research and innovation and making sure that we operate as a national network, as I have emphasized already. So next slide, please. So in the Southeast, we all have different structures in our GMSAs because we were asked to develop that for our local region. So in each GMSA, there is a partnership board, and our partnership board in Southeast is chaired jointly by the St George's, Epsom and St Helier Chief Exec Jacqueline Totterdell and Professor Ian Abbs, who is the Guy's and St Thomas's Chief Executive. I am the clinical director and I report into a medical director, Professor Sean Whitaker, who is the medical director for both the Genomic Laboratory Hub and the Genomic Medicine Service Alliance. And so through that, we have integrated governance between the lab and the Alliance. And that's really important because much of what the Alliance does impacts on the laboratory and vice versa. So we have quite a number of leads, and you're going to hear today from our neurology lead and our renal lead, in addition to colleagues who are also supporting the cardiology project as well. So some of the leads in our clinical leadership team are leads for both the lab and the GMSA. So we have these leads that we describe as part of our infrastructure, but in addition, we have a number of transformational projects, and we have individual leads for those projects as well. And we're very, very well supported in the Southeast by our project management team, one of whom, Makeda, has been very influential in developing the programme for today. So next slide, please. So this just gives a broad outline of how we have approached our transformational projects. And I've stolen this strapline, the Think Genetics, from our renal lead, Dr. Koziel, who's going to be talking later. But essentially, what we're trying to think about here is that we have our patient who has, presenting with maybe colorectal cancer or epilepsy or congenital malformation. And we then think about consenting the patient for the test, but also what sample do we need to get? Do we need to have blood? Do we need to have blood from just that patient, or do we need blood from the patient and both parents? And then we'll be thinking about what test we're going to do. Should we be thinking about tumor testing or other tissue testing? And then we'll consider whether this needs to go through a multidisciplinary team meeting, and we think about whether there are other aspects of reporting that need to be integrated into that. So is histopathology together with molecular testing. And then hopefully the outcome of that test may lead to some sort of personalized management. That might be specific anti-epileptic medication, or it may lead the patient to have specific screening. And then, as we always have done, though that patient and their family will be followed up in any cascade testing. So this is essentially a sort of a loop cycle, as patients may then enter back into the cycle if they then are found to be a gene carrier, for example. But underpinning all of that is the workforce transformation. So Makeda, next slide. So we have, as part of the project, we have 7 national transformation projects that were mandated by the genomics unit at NHS England, and they fall into 3 categories. The first is about new diagnostic approaches and early diagnosis. The next group is improving pathways and processes, and then the final one is about supporting workforce development. So these are specific projects on top of the general sort of business as usual transformation that we hope we're achieving. So I'm not going to talk about these in detail, but just to highlight that we're going to hear after me about the sudden cardiac death project. So on to the next slide. In addition to the national transformation projects, we have in each of the GMSAs, we have regional projects, and the number of regional projects is hugely variable according to which GMSA you're in, but we just have 3, and you're going to hear about 2 of those today. And hopefully in a future meeting, we'll be able to hear about the 3rd. So I'm going to go on to the next slide. So I'm going to skip out through these quite quickly, but I just wanted to put in here some of our key achievements. And I think these fall into 3 categories. The first is around creating capacity. And so we've developed our infrastructure, and we have a program framework in place. We've also created a number of lead roles throughout the Southeast, and that includes those sort of aligned to particular programs. So, for example, developed some Lynch syndrome leads and genetic diabetes nurses who have been sort of supporting this work. But in addition, there are some new roles. So we have a consultant pharmacist in genomics and nursing and midwifery genomics ambassadors. So next slide, please, Makeda. And we have carried out quite a number of engagement activities already. So in the green box here, these are the organisations with whom we have liaised already. So we've either done presentations or we are part of these groups already. And in our network, we have 7 ICSs, and that's very much on my agenda for this year is to make sure that we are working more closely with our ICSs. But we have 28 acute hospital trusts, and I'm hoping that we have many representatives of those trusts on this call. And so in terms of our achievements, we are going to hear about our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy later on in the programme, but we've also continued to develop our patient and public ambassadors group and appointed a joint people and communities representative. We've also created a communications and engagement strategy. Next slide. And so finally, we've been trying to build some capability as well. So in the last year, we've delivered over 135 educational sessions, and you can see from the pie chart where those have been. So I think we need a bit more of a focus on Kent. We've delivered those to 25 different specialties, which are outlined there. So quite a lot in paediatrics, quite a bit in neurology and oncology. And we just wanted to highlight one particular showcase, as it were. Our lead midwife and education lead together developed a massive open online course called Genetic Inheritance for Pregnancy. And that was run over an 8-week period in the summer and had 256 joiners initially. And so through these sorts of programs, we're managing to communicate genomics to different staff groups. So I think the last one is the final slide. This is just moving forward into 22-23. We have yet to hear finally from NHS England exactly what the final priority areas are going to be, but we have a broad understanding that some of those will be continuation of projects from this year, and there will begin to be a focus on pharmacogenomics as well. So using genomics to influence how we prescribe. And I think people that listen to Radio 4 will have heard that there was a paper published from the Royal College of Physicians yesterday about pharmacogenomics, and this is very, very integrated into this project as well. So I will move on. I don't have time for questions, but I'm going to hand over now to my colleagues who are going to talk to you about the sudden unexpected death coronial pilot. So I'd like to introduce Professor Elijah Bear, who is my colleague here at St George's, and Professor Richard Sandford, Nick Sandford, who is my counterpart in the East. So over to you.
Thanks, Francis, and thank you, Makeda. Thanks for asking me to speak, and for Dick following on from me as well. I am going to talk to you about the NHS and Coronial Sudden Unexpected Death pilot program supported by the British Heart Foundation. I'm really pleased that we've got a few of the members of the British Heart Foundation team watching us today as we use their slides. But thank you for their support and for providing the slides, but also they're really integral to this being a successful project. I'm the chair of the steering group and the clinical lead for the program, and working with my colleagues Francis and Dick on this. Now, the background to the program, let's see. First of all, if there is any background that you want to look up afterwards in terms of guidelines and principles, then there's the European Society of Cardiology guidelines for the management of patients with arrhythmias and with sudden death. And there are also the recent 2020 guidelines that really update this and focus on what you need to do in the context of genomics and sudden unexplained death in families. And this is a much more detailed document, and there's a follow-up coming for the ESC guidelines and also for genetic testing guidelines being published later this year, both of them actually, two separate documents. There are two different approaches for investigating an unexplained sudden death where one suspects a genetic cause. And in general, these have been through an autopsy to exclude explainable causes and we feel therefore there may be an underlying genetic cause, as you'll see from prior research. One approach is through familial evaluation. Another approach is through molecular autopsy, which is post-mortem gene testing, and the confluence of the development of the GLHs and GMSAs has allowed us to potentially access these much more systematically than ever before for our patient groups. And this will allow the diagnosis of the cause of death, which is important in itself for families, and then potentially identify others who may be at risk. This arises from research data. I'm going to show you a couple of slides around this. We've published ourselves the largest group so far in the literature of cases of unexpected and unexplained sudden death, known as sudden arrhythmic death syndrome, where genomic testing can provide a 13% yield of immediately diagnostic variants that can be used in, to manage families, make diagnoses and manage families. And these encompass a range of cardiac conditions, primarily known as the channelopathies. These are electrical diseases, catecholaminergic polymorphic VT is possibly the top one because of its importance in childhood sudden death. Long QT syndrome is important, and then others such as Brugada syndrome and cardiomyopathy are picked up. Now, if we combine that with family evaluation in a systematic way in the clinical environment, we find clinical diagnoses such as Brugada syndrome, where genomics is less important in the diagnostic process. But if we combine the two approaches, we're able to enhance the diagnosis of long QT, CVVT, and cardiomyopathy, and combining genomics, post-mortem genomics, with family evaluation increases the yield by 50%. So we can diagnose around 40% of families on established clinical methods so far. Our aspiration is to do more. So we therefore know that when we do get access to families, and when they are offered the appropriate level of support and assessment, then there is a lot to be achieved. And there already are coroners, health professionals, and charitable groups that support these families and their access to it. But it's extremely heterogeneous, and we know that many families are left at risk without this support, without the clinical investigation, without the access to post-mortem gene testing, and sometimes without any knowledge. And so this pilot resulted from bringing together stakeholders from a number of different aspects. So we have the charitable groups such as the British Heart Foundation and Cardiac Risk in the Young, NHS England, the Department of Justice in the form of the Chief Coroner and the Coronial Service, the Royal College of Pathologists, and also Genomics England. By bringing those together, we aim to identify the cause of death and diagnose and treat relatives who are also potentially at risk of genetic conditions, and offer that in a systematic way by addressing three primary components: the importance of cardiac pathology, the availability of post-mortem gene testing, and clinical familial evaluation integrated with that genomic testing to provide a comprehensive personalized medical management for family members. As I've said, this is really highly heterogeneous across England, certainly across the UK, but across England because NHS England is our focus at this time. And it requires close working between NHS and coronial services. And with the opportunity arising from the genomic laboratories and the GMSAs, we're able to explore this. Is the slide going to go forward? Is it going to go forward? And so we've established pilot sites that correlate with the GMSAs, and you've already seen the location of the GMSAs. And the pathways will therefore improve access to our genomically driven clinical service. It's really centered around delivering to the patient, and we'll include both coroners, coroners' officers, pathologists, cardiologists, geneticists, and genetic scientists in our processes, and indeed regional boards for each GMSA and site in each GMSA have been set up, including all of these individuals and stakeholders in the process. The objectives are to establish a consistent referral pathway for pathology, routine tissue retention for histopathology and DNA extraction, establish communications between the coronial NHS services for referral of families, establishing mechanisms for standardized post-mortem gene testing using the GLHs, to develop and disseminate nationally applicable practice pathways once these 7 sites for the 7 GMSAs have completed their work, and to ensure that engagement and input from family members and support groups and interested in the area are all taken into account as part of that pathway. These are the program sites as part of each of the GMSAs. So St George's is the South London site, and the lead is for the GMSA there, as you know, is Francis, and Dick Sanford, who you'll hear from in a moment, is the lead of the East GMSA, and we co-lead the project from the GMSA point of view. You'll see leads from across the other sites, which include Manchester, Birmingham, Sheffield, Bristol, and North London. And finally, if I can get that moving forward once more, we anticipate in the end that we're going to see around 3 to 4 cases per month of unexplained sudden deaths, around 36 to 48 cases per year, and the plan is that these cases will be offered panel testing and then the potential for examining research to implementation of whole genome sequencing trios. So there's a really exciting program of research there that we anticipate, and Dick is now going to follow on and explain where we are at the moment in terms of current status. Thank you so much, Dick.
Great, thank you very much, Elijah. I'm just going to try and get control of the slides, if that's okay. I'm just going to wait for them to advance. I think they have been running a little bit slowly, but thank you very much indeed for giving me the opportunity to present at your meeting from a rival GMSA. But I can honestly say it's been a fantastic opportunity to be involved in this particular project. I'm still not here we go. So what I'd like to do is just to really sort of give a brief overview of the current status of this particular project. And once again, what I'd like to do very much is to obviously thank everybody who's been critical to establishing and developing this project, and in particular working with the BHF, who've brought a considerable amount of PMO experience to this particular project, which I think has been critical to getting what has been a significant and complex project in a number of centres off the ground. I'm still trying to advance it. It's going a little bit slowly. Do we want? Oh, here we go. We'll keep on going and see how we get on. So it's probably quite informative just to give you a brief idea of the sort of the program milestones. I think this in itself gives an indication to the scope of the project and the extent of the work required to get it developed. The pilot project is planned to run over a 2-year period, and you've heard Elijah already referencing the composition of the local program boards at each of the pilot sites. They also report to a national steering group that reports to a national oversight group. So there's a considerable amount of governance involved in a project such as this, you can imagine. So the project actually goes back a number of years now to when the BHF and the senior coroners agreed to implement this particular project. And I think both Francis and Elijah have also said that the environment around the development of the GLHs and the GMSAs was also was an important factor in facilitating the ability to deliver such a project. So back in March 2020, a national program workshop was set up to initiate the program of work. But of course, as happened to absolutely everybody, there were major interruptions to the project because of the pandemic. And so really a lot of the work has only started in more recent months. So in early 2021, there have been a number of priority working groups to establish and develop the program. and the major priorities clearly were setting up the pilot sites, developing the inclusion criteria, for example, and I'll go through a number of the work packages that are going on here, the inclusion criteria for the project, consenting process, the type of data that we were going to be collecting and how the project was going to be evaluated, working out more detail around genetic testing that was going to be offered, the development of a pathology protocol, and again, the sort of the communication materials, not just to sort of the cardiology services via the inherited cardiac condition clinics, but also to the coronial service. So an organisation for which genomics isn't a language that's in common use, and of course the very key commitment to the family involvement. And as things progressed, we obviously worked through the development, all of those reporting to both the national oversight and steering groups. And by the time we reached the end of December 2021, we had got to a very good stage where we had completed coroner's office training. We had been able to deliver the tissue retention consent form, the family information leaflets, and generate a very good toolkit to cover all of those various areas that I've already mentioned. And as we've proceeded into 2022, we've managed to complete the pathology protocol and also start the data capture process that it is clearly going to be ongoing through the entire project. And of course, all of that comes with a considerable amount of input from a very substantial and large multidisciplinary expert team, as I've already said, very expertly pulled together by the BHF team. I'm just going to wait for the next slide to come up. So the program is now live, which has been a fantastic achievement. So across a number of the pilot sites, the senior coroners have already identified cases that fit criteria for this particular pilot project, where the family members are going to be referred directly by the coroner's officers into the local ICC clinics. And this is, as I said, in progress in a number of sites, but the majority of sites are imminently ready to start progressing this. So that's a very exciting development as far as we're concerned. I'm just waiting for the next slide. So a key part of all of this, as I've said, has been the development of a sort of a toolkit that we've been able to roll out across all the pilot sites. So as you can tell from the original description of the project by Elijah, that each of the GMSAs has one pilot site that is developing this particular project. So the program support components are quite diverse, from the consent form for tissue retention, for example, for both pathology, histopathological analysis and DNA extraction, for example, the genetic testing inclusion and exclusion criteria, again, and most of this has been developed by expert working groups and shared with the national steering and oversight groups, providing that very key supporting information for the families, which has been delivered by CRY, for example, on the value of tissue retention, and that's been approved and now signed off by family representatives. And it doesn't really need me to say that this is a time where families are clearly devastated by the impact of the sudden death of a relative. And it's very difficult, I think, for us all to imagine exactly what they're going through as this process evolves in parallel with their process of grieving within their family as well. Establishing a link between all the pilot sites and expert cardiac pathology has now been established as well. I've mentioned that the coroner's offices training materials have been developed, and we've been delivering the training for the coroner's officers over this time as well, and developing a central sort of resource repository for accessing all the latest versions of the program support information. And the final bit of this is standardizing the data capture through a REDCap system being developed in the southeast. So I'm just going to pull up the next slide. So behind all of that, clearly there are going to be more strategic enablers, which we've gone back to NHS England to highlight. I'm not going to dwell on the existing state of specialist cardiac pathology, but clearly it's going to be important to ensure that specialist cardiac pathology services are going to be accessible to not just this particular project, but it's going to be accessible to all the ICC clinics and other services that will be requesting this. So scoping is currently underway within NHS E&I to enable national access to specialist cardiac pathology in suspected cases that we've been discussing today where required. And that is likely to be aligned to specialised commissioning services linked with the coroner's offices for each case to support signposting by the coroner's officer. So that's quite a complex process that's already underway. In addition, this is going to also contribute to the service specification for an inherited cardiac condition clinic. And that, again, is something that is ongoing. And clearly the need for that is to ensure that funding is available for an equitable nationwide service for families that allows equitable access, including self-referral. And underpinning all of that is clearly going to be workforce development. You've heard of all of the different key roles that are going to be involved in this pathway, for example, all of whom are going to require important support during this pilot project, but also with the anticipation of a national rollout. And of course, a national registry is going to be required to support that. And we are aware that there is absence of a national registry. And so that is a key strategic enabler that has been identified already. I'm just going to advance to that. And one other thing that is clearly going to be crucial to this particular pilot project is the evaluation phase, which is being led by the BHF. And again, I won't go through this in detail, but there's clearly going to be a quantitative component. So we are agreeing and have agreed that the specific KPIs and the minimum data set, and the minimum data set is clearly going to allow us the ability to track individual level data as people progress through the pathway with and then the ability to evaluate the results of testing at the end of that pathway. A qualitative component, which is clearly going to be important in terms of identifying the barriers, enablers to delivering this particular pathway and a successful national rollout, and also to capture the patient and family experience, which is clearly going to be absolutely key to getting this right. So I think I am probably there at the end of that. So I think questions are going to go into the chat, but thank you again very much for the opportunity to present this project.
Thank you very much, Dick. I think we've probably, if we have got any questions in the chat, we might have a chance to answer some of them. I don't think there are any there at the moment, but that's fine. If people want to put them, we will have a Q&A at the end, and Dick is going to be able to hang around to answer any questions we've got. So I'd like to move on to Dr. Emma Matthews, who is going to do a double act. Emma is our neurology lead for the GMSA and is also leading a regional transformation project on neurology, and Mark, our clinical nurse specialist, is going to speak as well. So over to you, Emma. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Frances. So hello, everyone. As Frances says, I'm Emma Matthews. I'm a consultant neurologist based at St. George's Hospital, but also the neurology lead for the GMSA. And I just want to talk to you a little bit today about our work using genomics to transform outcomes in neurology. I'm just hoping the slide advances. Lovely. So as Frances mentioned, this project is a regional project, and we are very keen to ensure that we do work across the region and meet new teams and make new collaborations to ensure that this happens. But to introduce you so far to our core working team, you're going to hear after me from Mark Mencius, who is our new neurogenetics nurse. Elizabeth Galizia is a consultant colleague of mine with a special interest in epilepsy. Ruth Williams is a consultant pediatrician at the Evelina Children's Hospital, also, as it happens, with an interest in epilepsy. And Adam Breaky is our project manager. And Nicole Sudarsan, I think I've seen Nicole on the call. Nicole is actually the pediatric lead for the Southeast GMSA, but he also, his subspecialty, he is a pediatric neurologist. And so we have some cross-cutting across the pediatric and neurology areas. And I suspected I was going to have a camera today, a computer today without a camera. So this is me. So if you ever do see me in the corridor or at other meetings, please do say hi. So our project is entitled Transforming Outcomes in Neurology, with a particular focus on the age of transition from pediatric to adult care. So when we were designing the project or thinking about what we wanted to achieve, we thought about four key areas of diagnosis, management, research, and education. And as I say, the idea was that these would work across the whole range of transition. But we very much recognize in order to achieve that, we're going to need to have strong networks, both across the region, but between secondary, tertiary care, but very much involving our colleagues in primary care. So why did we decide to focus on the age of transition? I think the first reason that we thought about this age was partly because of equity and access to next generation sequencing. So you will all know there has been this huge expansion and change in how genetic testing is now offered. And if you are a young baby or a child today, the testing that is available to you it far advances what may have been offered to somebody who is now at the age of transition 15 or 16, and they may have missed that diagnostic opportunity. I should say that equally applies to anyone who is older than the age of transition. So we don't exclude any age groups, but we do just have a focus on this age. So transition is a perfect time, I think, to reflect on diagnosis in patients who are undiagnosed. It's also a time, of course, when young people are considering relationships and they may be considering their own family planning, and is another ideal time to focus on genetics. So we do focus currently on the more complex genetic disorders, and as we are a pilot project, we have a focus currently on neuromuscular disorders and epilepsy, as there are areas in neurology where there's a heavy weight, if you like, of genetic diagnoses. Again, we have absolutely no intention of being exclusionary. This is just as we're beginning, and we do want to roll out across the whole of neurology with a particular focus next and moving into movement disorders, which also has a high burden, if you like, of genetic disease. We recognize, of course, these complex disorders, they have multi-system or often multidisciplinary team needs. Um, and this also feeds into equity in care. Many of you, if you do work in the pediatric sector, you'll know that often these children, they're looked after incredibly well. There's very good collaborative and network working. And I think in many respects in adult services for some of these disorders, we haven't quite got there yet. And sometimes it's almost like a bit of a bereavement, I think, for families when they move from pediatrics to adult in the difference in care. And so we seek to try and address this and make it equitable. We very much want to support primary care. We also are quite concerned that many children or young people, when they transition, they may, for whatever reason, that transition may fail. And then the only real contact they have with medical services is with their GP. And we want to try and support that. It must be recognized genetic therapies that they're now here. Genetic therapies are in the clinic, and we need to ensure that these can be offered in adult services as well as pediatric. So our transition aims, broadly speaking, when we sat down to look at this, we realized that we really have to map where existing services are, what networks already exist, how people are working together, what works well, what doesn't work well. And we very much want to hear from patient journeys and focus groups. We might have an idea in mind as we start of what we'd like to achieve, but we want to certainly make sure that this is what our patients want to achieve. Um, And ultimately, we would like there to be a very streamlined transition network for neurology across the whole of the Southeast. And we'd like to consider that it could be used as an exemplar model for essentially any rare disease transition, because many rare diseases have similar needs in terms of multidisciplinary care and so on. And we would very much like to be able to create specific transition key worker or key workers posts as the project goes forward. So our work on diagnosis, how are we going to achieve this? I think many of you will know the genetic testing does come with quite a lot of practicalities, form filling, consenting, practicalities of taking blood tests, etc. Francis said at the beginning that the overarching aim of the GMSA is to ensure equity of access. So patients shouldn't necessarily have to travel miles to a centre just to have a blood test for their genetic testing. So we created a new neurogenetics CNS post, and Mark has been appointed to this post. He helps significantly with these practicalities and equity of access, as well as many other areas, but he is going to provide more detail after me. We also want to certainly make diagnosis easier and quicker. And we've been doing some work and taking part in roundtable discussions with many groups representing, for example, one of our disorders, myotonic dystrophy. And it's very much been highlighted to us from these discussions that even among other doctors, there is a lack of awareness of myotonic dystrophy. Now, this is a multi-system disorder, so these patients present to many different clinics. And I think one area that we want to work on, or whether there are specific features in the other presentations that may automatically activate genetic testing without necessarily making the diagnosis of myotonic dystrophy from the clinical side. So for example, they do have cardiac arrhythmias, whether there are specific features on their genetic investigations that we could pull out that would activate the test. We've also been doing some work with Professor Baer regarding sudden death investigations, as these patients can experience sudden death, and similarly in other areas, so in ophthalmology clinics for those with young onset cataracts. So in terms of management, it is very exciting that genetics can lead to personalized medicine, but I think it must be said for others where that's not yet the case. There are many symptomatic, multidisciplinary and holistic inputs that are available and can make a significant and speedy difference to quality of life. And so our project is not just about diagnosing people who don't yet have a diagnosis. It's about ensuring those who do have a diagnosis are signposted to all of these services and receive the care that is available to them, including peer support and charity support. Oh, just waiting for the last slide. Oh yeah, there we go. And so for research, I think there are disease-specific insights to be made, myotonic dystrophy being an example of that. But I think we're also very proactive in being aware of the possibility of upcoming clinical trials. So within our own area, we know, for example, that in the area of FSHD and myotonic dystrophy type 1, there are clinical trials, early stage trials that are beginning in the US. We think these trials will be offered on a wider scale in the next few years, and we've already taken part in trial networks, both in the UK, Europe, and in the US, to try to ensure that if these do come about, they are also attracted to the UK, and that there would be sites in South London so that patients can be offered participation, as well as encouraging patients to enter patient registries. And then as a final thought, with the WGS sequencing that is now being offered, we also have some links with the university for those who do enter the research domain, for example, if they have had all available sequencing and remain without a diagnosis. So busy and exciting times. We'd love to hear from anybody if any of these areas resonate with the work that you do, if you're interested in being involved in the project. But I will hand over now to my colleague, Mark Mencius.
Hello, I hope you can all hear me. I'll see if I could. There we go. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak to the Southeast Genomics Spring Festival. I'm Mark Mencius. I'm the neurogenetics clinical nurse specialist. And today I'm just focusing on the nurse-led neurogenetics clinic that I have set up here in St. George's. I hope it moves. There we go. So to give you a background, so the Neurogenetics Clinic is a nurse-led service, primarily based here in Atkinson-Morley Regional Neurosciences Center. And our aim is to improve the diagnosis and health outcomes of patients with rare genetic neurological diseases. At present, our focus is on young adults with complex epilepsies and neuromuscular disorders. However, there is scope to expand, as Emma said, to moving forward to include movement disorders. So our objectives are fivefold. So number one, to offer whole genome sequencing to identify the genetic cause of rare neurological conditions, to provide genetic counseling, genomic education, and support cascade testing for at-risk family members, signposting to hospital and community services, engage charities and patient support networks, and to promote clinical research and patient registries. A lot of people are interested in terms of what is the benefits of having a nurse-led neurogenetics clinic. So primarily, I say the same thing with what my other consultants say. It's more about the equitable access to genomic testing, and primarily identify genetic cause of neurological disorders may explain the condition and provide a prognosis. It will also help in shortening the diagnostic odyssey for patients with neurogenetic conditions. Thirdly, we can enable the wider family to access clinical genomic services and counseling, and access community and hospital services that some patients may not necessarily be aware of, particularly in clinical research and clinical trials. Lastly, there is a significant loss to follow-up for some patients with neurogenetic conditions, because some of them may not necessarily have treatments. So we would like to significantly reduce that, reduce loss to follow-up. For our patients, what can you expect from us, or from me in particular? So to give you a taster of what I do, so I collect and assess family history, collect and collate clinical information, and then I also draw up a family pedigree, which I share with the rest of my multidisciplinary team. I could also offer genomic education and counseling before and after the genetic testing, and of course, to obtain a valid informed consent for the test. I also collect the blood samples myself, deliver it to the lab so that it's a lot quicker. And for those who are unable to come to the hospital, I also offer video clinics, telephone clinics, and all I have to do is literally just send off to you the test form, and you can go to your nearest hospital and get your blood taken from there. I also accept referral from other teams, internal and external. And I also refer my patients to various services, as I mentioned earlier. I don't work in isolation. I work with the clinical geneticists as well as our neurologists. So essentially, I'm the link between those two departments. And most importantly, there's the research element in my role. So I have close working relationship as well with our clinical research and our clinical research facility, for that matter. So for those of you, for our clinicians, if you have any patients and you are from outside of St. George's, you can send the referral to me through this email, the neurogenetics@stgeorges.nhs.uk. And for those who are internal, you can copy me into your letter. I've got my email address followed. There you go. So thank you very much. So that is my email address. And you can also follow us on Twitter.
Thank you very much, Mark and Emma, for that lovely overview of the service, which I think is sort of just getting going, but I think it is very exciting times, you know, particularly with the ambitions of the genomic medicine service, which is sort of leading on into therapy. That is ultimately, that's the aim of everything. I think a diagnosis in itself is not good enough. We need to do something with that diagnosis. So I think the clinic is a major step forward. So I'm going to hand over now to Karen Slay. Karen is one of two senior program managers for our GMSA, and Karen, together with Dr. Andrew Kulkarni, has been leading a piece of work on developing our equality, diversity and inclusion strategy. And I'm very grateful to her to talking to you about this today. Over to you, Karen.
Lovely, thank you, Francis, and thank you for inviting me. I'd like to just give a particular thanks to the chair of this piece of work, as Francis has mentioned, Dr. Andrew Kulkarni, who's been absolutely brilliant in her leadership with getting us this far, and also we'll come on to all the collaboration and everybody that's contributed to the strategy. It really has been a true collaboration piece, and I'll give you a quick overview of the background, the things that we found out through our journey and the planned actions. So I'll just request control. So bear with me. Thank you. Okay, so I'll start with a bit of background. What we want to really emphasise, and you've heard it in the presentation so far, we wanted to build on what was already existing throughout the GMSA and all the good work that's been going off, with all to do with regards to the inclusion and public health and inequalities. And we did quite a bit of background work. So we wanted to make sure which were the key levers out there. What was the long-term plan saying? Absolutely clear about how we can provide and contribute to innovation and driving that responsiveness to diverse populations and reduce health inequalities. All the work that's going off with our system partners across our geography, as Francis mentioned right at the very beginning, and making sure that we lever into all of the priorities that are being identified through our ICSs. And also then there's thriving places, being absolutely cognizant of our geography. And we worked across a wide range with this piece of work. We had over 40 individuals join our task and finish group, which I'll explain, and also we worked across the geography to look at all of those different existing strategies, because we didn't want to be duplicating anything. We wanted to really build on and build the learning that we could bring into our GMSA. So also we've got that with the direction of the long-term plan and all of our work throughout the GMSA, that absolute focus on digitalisation and the enablement through innovation and technology. And also looking, and if we look at how we've interpreted the way we're approaching through the GMSA, it's absolutely led clinically. And when we're looking through the ICS, the key legislative directive is around that clinical leadership, distributed leadership. We also really took in the key learning around the people plan, making sure that we understood the impact internally and how we were operating within our services. And then the national directive around the key focus around why it is important for us in genomics, and the life sciences vision really captures this well. It's about looking at that reduction in the deep inequalities and actually really pulls out the impact of the pandemic. More recently, we're working with our partners to learn a little bit more about the NHS England and Improvement initiative around what's called Core 20+5, and this is looking and focusing the ICS on core deprivation areas and 5 key clinical areas. Out of all of this background, the information that we'd got, we identified that actually there were really key themes, a focus on that innovation, looking at health inequalities and understanding the risks around this. Okay, so We really wanted to introduce in this strategy and our approaches the population health, working with our wider partners, as Francis mentioned, going forward. And we wanted to understand our position as an alliance in that partnership and how we can lever from that expertise to really improve on our patient-centred care where we can, learn from others, work collaboratively and look at how we can co-design. And this piece of work really was an example of co-designing with core collaborative partners, and also Mary from our patient and public ambassadors group leading the way. And also we're working in and recognising that actually we're still in recovery mode from COVID-19 and the operational responses. So we did find through the strategy that core representatives who had volunteered their time were redeployed through the development of this. But actually, as the Thriving Places document really highlights, it's about understanding our contribution to the wider health and wellbeing of our geography. How did this collaboration work? Well, I'm pleased to say we set up with the leadership of Andrew, the task and finish group, and we met with the clear vision that we needed a strategy that enhanced where we were and to build on what we've got, and actually really make sure that we can look at how we can build on that collaborative development. Everybody volunteered their time, which we're absolutely grateful for, and they developed key principles and actions, because the key recommendation was around actually we've got to really make sure that we look and focus on the actions that are going to take us forward. We also have developed the Equality Health Impact Assessment, and this was a really important part of our business planning process this year, and I'll go into why that's going to be really important for building on some of our positive action. So we had a very tight timescale. This was an ambitious timescale for us, and we started actually all the desktop research right back from September and through to October, with our first task and finish meeting being on the 1st of November. Then through November and December, early December, we met with the 3 pillar meetings. Again, we had volunteer chairs, and then we drafted the first strategy at the beginning of January and closed down the consultation period on the 11th of February. And then that's now gone to our management board and our partnership boards for sign off. The key bits of the consultation that we've really learnt and pulled back into the final strategy was around that absolute focus on more inclusion of the public voice, and where we can keep it as simple as possible, and also make sure that we focus on delivering a few things really well in the first year and build our strength going forward. So to design the strategy, the task and finish group really wanted to focus on absolutely understanding what's the purpose of this strategy. As I mentioned right at the beginning, particularly through the desktop review, it's identifying where we are going to complement what is already existing and build those strengths and those improvements. And we wanted to really look at the 3 pillars around values and behaviours, service transformation, engagement and communication, and identify the core actions and be very time specific and be realistic. And we wanted to make sure that we could really understand who were the actions applying to, and actually that everybody, to understand everybody that works in the service, services that we've got, actually do they understand this direction of travel for the strategy. And also to make it purposeful, we need to be able to demonstrate the impact. So we've designed through the actions core outcome measures to monitor the impact through culture, leadership and process. We highlighted in our first GMSA business plan that we were focusing in on inequalities, and also through the next round of our business plan for this year, we've identified a key action to make sure that we embed and deliver our strategy, and we can now launch our new strategy. We've designed to make it easy, a strategy on a page. So I'm just going to skip through the key elements of that strategy. The collaboration built the pledge, and it's absolutely focused on inclusion, sharing people's experiences and perspectives, and that requires us going out to listen to more groups and actually start to really think through that positive action about targeting those underserved areas or those hard to hear voices, and everything is centered around our patient-centered care. We had the pillars that we started with, and actually we were clear right from the beginning that we needed to be clear about the measures. What pillar one was we came up with the key principles were around absolutely being able to demonstrate our core values and behaviours in everything that we do and widen the involvement wherever we can into our work, and also making sure that we can tailor training development to our staff and our patients and our public where we possibly can to make them make it as collaborative as possible, and also going back to the people plan, making sure all of our recruitment and our own internal diversity is addressed. With service transformation, this is a really key element, and we've seen it throughout the threads of the presentation so far, is around that sharing of learning, and today's one of those examples. It's about bringing learning and sharing it as far and wide across our different networks, and actually then as part of the service transformation, can we measure the impact that we want to demonstrate, and that will be through quantitative measures, some key performance indicators that will allow us to benchmark against best in practice and continue to learn. And actually the key feedback from the task and finish groups was around making sure we had that continuous feedback loop, that we feed back all that we're learning, so that qualitative information, and that can be from compliments, comments, complaints, as well as key surveys and conversations wider. We will be building all of this into our service planning and make sure that we can understand those improvement actions and build those into our future delivery. So it's really important that we widen that voice around the public and patient involvement, involve our communications and involve those communities as much as we can, and address our positive action through the implementation of the air quality impact assessments. And this will help understand where those risks are, and engage with as many projects and identify those interdependencies and share internally and externally as much as possible. And we recognise that these core principles, we want everybody to be able to endorse them, work with them and understand their impact to drive this forward and bring the strategy to life. So what are our key priorities over this coming year particularly? And the advice from the task and finish group was actually, if we can get some of these foundations right, then we can carry on continuously through the life cycle of the GMSA. I'm not going to read all of these out, but this is in the Y section. It represents our pledge that we want to put forward, and the key action for this year is embedding that pledge and making sure that we can address and all take on board what are we doing to be able to demonstrate that we are delivering this pledge. And actually an additional one, as Francis mentioned, is that wider ICS, our partnership, the wider engagement across systems and networks. Also by the end, even though this is by the end of Q2, the what are we going to be doing, and we'll be doing this through Q1 and Q2, we'll be looking how we can set up an independent steering group, and that'll help us oversee the delivery of the strategy and build into our already existing governance frameworks, and make sure that we've got a clear, robust approach, wraparound programme approach to our delivery of our strategy, making sure that we're really focusing on building the detail around how are we going to build capacity to understand the wide agendas around inequalities, public health, and where do we lever that expertise, so build opportunities to link in with key expertise across all of our different networks, make sure that we absolutely integrate the work that we're doing into the continuous cycle of our business planning, and always seek to look over towards the horizon, what's coming, where can we lever best practice from. And so some of the detail of how we're going to do that, we're certainly going to be working with our patient and public voices and building on specialist interest groups to support different project areas and different service areas where we can. We need to be able to identify priorities and detail from the risks that we identify through our impact assessments. That's really important for us to deep dive into some of the data that we've already got and then start exploring how can we build on that data and what can we start asking ourselves and where can we focus where we've got determinants, public determinants that we know that we're not hitting, so we can add to that wider public health agenda. We will be doing more of this, having these big conversations, workshops, and working with our communities, which will build our networks and build our inclusion ability. So quite a tall order for this week, but these are our key priorities. We'd really like to encourage, as we're building on our networks, for you to get involved if you want to get involved. Also, we will be happy to learn from others, to look and seal any opportunity we can for sharing our learning, and also to provide forums where other people can come in and share their learning. And also, you know, just let us know if you just want to keep updated, whether you want to dip in and out. That would be, you're more than welcome. So thank you very much. It's work in progress, exciting, and a large agenda to support everybody. Thank you, Francis.
Thank you, Karen. That was a beautiful overview of a huge amount of work. I know an awful lot of effort has gone into that, and you summarised it very succinctly. That was brilliant. And I think that important message about getting in touch, we will reiterate that at the end as well. But obviously, if any of these presentations have piqued your interest and you want to find out more, you can either look at the website or you can contact the individuals. And of course, this is a snapshot of other work that is going on. So there's a lot of other stuff happening as well. So please do get in touch if you've got an interest in anything we've talked about today. So finally, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Anya Koziel, and I'm really sorry, Anya, I can never pronounce your surname, so I'll probably say it completely wrong. But Anya is our renal lead and is leading the transformation project, Think Genetics, that I borrowed earlier, and she's going to talk to you with Eduardo Lee, who is the clinical nurse specialist. So I'm going to hand over to you, Anya.
Thank you very much, Francis. It's actually very, very exciting to be part of this initiative, and particularly for someone like me who's been doing sort of genomics research for many years. And it's really important, I think, that it now gets implemented to the NHS, because it really is the way forward and the way I think we're going to be transforming medicine in the future. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a brief overview of why we think genomics is important and genetics is important in renal. And then Eduardo's going to take over and very much give a much more nursing perspective and also sort of inform on some of the educational stuff we're going. To be honest, renal is very much more a startup, I should say. We're not quite as developed as the rest of the projects, because I think it's really because renal is very big and there's many priorities. It's really, really very busy. And obviously, sort of when you're a jobbing clinician in a clinic and you've got 1,000 things to do anyway, then you kind of do the things that are perhaps at face value the more important and then think about the rest later. However, it is actually really important to test for genes in kidney disease, because certainly in pediatrics, a lot of what we do is based on genomics and kidney malformations and actually genetic disease. And actually, at the moment, probably more than around 10% of adult kidney failures is thought to be to do with genetics. But actually, as testing remains rather limited at the moment, it's probably more than that. Interestingly, only about 30 cases are familial or run in families. And often genetic kidney disease is very silent until it's very advanced. So people crash land in kidney failure, and then you're scrabbling around with conventional treatments, conventional treatments and investigations to try and work out what was the initiating cause. And obviously, as a consequence, it's very difficult to identify pre-symptomatic individuals. Our conventional investigations, we like to stick needles into things, people, kidneys, and do lots and lots of scans, and also do lots and lots of blood tests, but these can be quite non-specific. And unfortunately, if you do make a diagnosis late, often the patient is in kidney failure, and really the only options are dialysis and kidney transplant. But increasingly, there are interventions that can be instituted early, and that would be ideal. The other problem with conventional investigations is that the way your kidneys filter and the number of filtering units you have is heritable. So it varies from individual to individual. So that means that kidney disease can cluster in families, but the presentation within that family can be a little bit different. And the kidney development itself is very complex, and kidney functions are very diverse. So again, it becomes quite complex just to identify on conventional. There is a big spectrum of genetic kidney disease, anything from the kidneys being malformed, which we call genetic tract malformations, through to systemic diseases, so diseases that are affecting other organs that also hit the kidney, cancer syndromes, and also much more sort of endocrine, sort of more hormonal problems as well that can be genetic, because of course the kidney not only does filtering, but it also does a lot of body homeostasis and also has a big endocrine function. Kidney disease is really a very significant burden in the UK, and that is again a very good reason to try and see if we can identify patients early and do things about them before they go into kidney failure. This is actually 10-year-old data, and even 10 years ago, the budget, which is about 1.3% of the NHEC budget, was 1.45 billion, and that probably is greater now. And probably there are, within the southeast, we have quite a large population. There's about 12.2 million people on the last census, of which 2.6 million are children, and probably around 750,000 develop chronic kidney disease every year. So there is quite a disease burden to be dealing with, and certainly in children, a lot of it's genetic. As a consequence, we feel there's a need for change, hence the sort of project and the inception of this sort of changing of the landscape of the way we think about how we test for genetic disease in kidneys. As I mentioned, the current situation, only about 10% of adults and less than 50% of children are offered genetic testing, and it doesn't matter really where you are, but the distribution across the geography is not equitable. And as has been said in previous talks, that is one of the points we're trying to get across. Chronic kidney disease as well, most genetic kidney disorders progress to kidney failure. And the reality is that it still takes a lot of visits over many years to determine what the cause is, and specifically if it's a molecular cause. As I mentioned, there is a significant disease burden, and it's expensive to the NHS. And interestingly, it isn't just all one gene. Kidney disease isn't particularly rare. The rare diseases are rare, but there are a lot of kidney diseases which have a genetic influence that I think, with the way that genetic testing is going and the ability to now screen a whole genome, so all the genes and all the bits of genetic information within an individual, we're going to pretty much see, I think, apart from the sort of vastly important pharmacogenomics, we're also going to be able to see why these diseases happen and again intervene, and also work out how, from a research perspective, all these genes interact with each other to cause disease. At the moment, there's quite a big barrier because there is a lack of dedicated pathways and services, so only a minority of patients receive a diagnosis. However, one advantage is we do have quite well-developed networks over sort of kidney failure, dialysis, transplantation. So we already have a sort of existing infrastructure we plan to use. And a big issue is kind of a lack of physician expertise. When you're kind of, as I mentioned, when you're busy, you're thinking of other things. You don't necessarily think to test for the genetics, even though that actually can be of benefit to your patients. So really the rationale of our project is to sort of very much introduce an educational program that will enable access equitably across the region so that clinicians can go in and recognize things early and intervene, which will have inevitable cost savings. Any sort of genetic diagnosis complements conventional tests that we use, scans and blood tests, and actually will eventually, hopefully, remove the need for things like kidney biopsy. There are certainly some kidney conditions now that we can do genetics on, and it obviates sticking a needle in a kidney, which isn't without a risk. It's not a terrible procedure, but it's not without risks, and in children requires a general anaesthetic. It also permits identifying at-risk family members. At the moment, we don't really have a system in place, and also in a timescale that makes a difference, so that if patients require a kidney transplant, families can actually fully consider the risks and benefits of donating their own kidney, and also know whether they're infected or not. So we can exclude unaffected relatives. So the whole stress of having unnecessary prolonged surveillance by yearly scan can be completely taken away by a sort of almost plus minus, you have a disease, you don't have a disease type approach. And of course, with pharmacogenomics, the whole aim in the end is to do personalized medicine. So really to be much more precise in the way we diagnose patients, and also certainly in kidney disease, institute the right therapy at the right time, so we can hopefully avoid the inevitable dialysis and kidney transplantation. And of course, as has been mentioned in some of the other talks, there are emerging treatments, including gene therapy, and this will also improve the patient experience and outcome. So changing the landscape, our initiative centres around this paradigm of think genetics, because at the moment, having spoken to colleagues, having spoken to patients and being part of some patient focus groups, so it's not really thought about in kidney medicine enough at the moment. So really the whole primary aim will be to try and get people to think about genetics so that the right patient gets the right tests at the right time, because obviously you don't want to be globally testing patients that don't need it. Equally, you need to be offering tests to patients that do need it, and in a timely fashion. And also to implement this in a sort of integrated end-to-end network, because the Southeast is huge. And again, as has been mentioned, we don't want to just have these centres. We want people to just be able to go locally, potentially to primary care, to get a test and get the right support. And so really, again, the second part of our project is building the infrastructure to roll out these networks. And our approach has really been to sort of initially raise awareness by educating and informing and putting in place processes and guidance, because there's a lot of information out there, both through experts in the field, but also through the Higher Education England. There's a lot of courses you can do, and it's important that people get informed through that as well. And also to enable access. That is really a problem at the moment. I think it's very important to identify patients, and this may be in a very multidisciplinary way. And again, the right type of genetic test, there's quite a lot of evidence to support that to actually be successful in your genetic hunt, beyond the sort of easier rare disease type approach where you have panels of tests that you can do and you pretty much have an idea of what you're going to be identifying within a particular patient, and then also to translate these genetic findings into a more personalized care approach. And really, I don't think it's going to be as an alternative. I mean, people get quite worried about the introduction of artificial intelligence into radiology, for example. Will it get rid of all the doctors and the radiologists? Of course it won't, but I think as an adjunct to both the clinical assessment and the tests we do, I think it will play a very valuable role and hopefully speed up and a patient diagnosis, and also enable interventions to make the outcome better. So really, again, the right patient receives the right test at the right time. There's quite a lot of justification. Before we started this project, the States, as usual, are a little bit ahead of us in the UK, but they don't have quite the best testing, I have to say. I think we have that with our sort of implementation into a national healthcare system. There's a lot of emerging data that actually improving the diagnostic yield as well will improve the outcome, and it is a significant. But you've got to attribute the right diagnosis and therefore the right management. So really, our aim is to build this renal genomic services. As I mentioned, our focus at the moment is accessibility, education, but ultimately we'll be able to enable identification of patients, and then packaging up all the blood that's drawn, because the actual genetic test is quite easy. You take a blood test, you send it to the Genomics hub, and the whole new national genomics testing is much more organized. It's very easy to follow a test directory and send the test in the appropriate way. but also to educate and signpost clinicians how to do this and how to do this sensitively. Because of course, you're not just testing the patient, you're testing the family as well. So it's important to do this correctly. And also, once the results return, to have a multidisciplinary review, which we sort of started instituting in our pediatric nephrology space, and that way raise awareness both to the clinicians and the patients. Our sort of proposal is to very much sort of identify the patient and, if possible, work out the tests, and then to do a differential and use not only conventional testing, but also the sequencing data to arrive at a diagnosis. It's a challenge, as again has been covered in some previous talks. To provide this equitable and joined up network care, there's an awful lot of things to think about, and it spans education, logistics, support, staffing and skill mix, and also the documentation. The request forms and the consent forms are extensive, but this is important, and it's important they're done correctly. The key determinants are really the percentage and outcome is directly correlated with the implementation of these networks, and this has been studied and identified, but also the diagnostic yield is very much based not only on this, but also the type of genetic test and doing it correctly. In pediatric nephrology, we've instituted a patient pathway. We identify the patients either through the GP, hospital doctor, and this is something we want to continue to implement. We take a brief history, a genetic test, and then once we have the results, which we use through the National Test Directory, we have a multidisciplinary meeting, and then we give the results, and then either refer on or also include at the really pretty much the stage of genetic testing, the clinical genetics services. So really our expected outcome is, in the first instance, will be improved education awareness, and also enabling staff and ensuring that NHS staff has the understanding and confidence to use this service effectively. We'd like to resolve undiagnosed disorders, and also integrate into the diagnostic workup, and to really monitor the rate of disease progression, evaluation, and determine treatment by early institution of pharmacogenomics, and really to improve the diagnosis and genetics. One of the things that we're also working on with Andrew, who has another role aside from the sort of ethnicity diversity, is to actually bring the whole project into the 21st century, have a kidney genomics navigator app. And this is going to be something that, because maybe not everybody has a computer, but everybody has a smartphone. So it's something that's going to be not only designed for patients, but also clinicians, spanning through from primary, secondary to tertiary care. So it'd be enable clinicians to make an easy diagnosis and actually work out how they can refer the patient, and also what tests to do, and really at the reach of their fingertips. So thank you very much. And I'm just going to hand over now to Ed.
Thank you, Anya. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Eduardo Lee. I'm the Renal Genomics CNS for Southeast GMSA. I'll be sharing with you how are we mainstreaming in the region. So I'll just share these two articles. So it concludes that the integration of renal genetic testing into the multidisciplinary clinics often allows a more precise diagnosis, which would benefit patients, their relatives, and the clinicians providing the care, and of course, affording pre-symptomatic family focused on counseling and other managements. So this would be our model. It's still in development, but it's just a bigger picture on how we will be integrating with existing renal network. So we would be supporting the primary, secondary, and tertiary setting. In pediatrics, it will be more straightforward since they are seen in Evelina. With the adult, it will require more collaborations. As I mentioned, it's more regional rollout. At the moment, we would be coordinating with clinical educators and practice development nurses to bring awareness and education to the workforce. And I'll be mentioning or sharing with you our current development on that on later slides. And also, more importantly, we will be supporting the inherited renal clinics in each trust. And in terms of more specifically the consenting, the counseling forms needed to be used, and so on. And furthermore, there will be MDTs to review and analyze results along with the interpretation, to discuss with genetic scientists, to move forward into patient management. And there will also be regular MDTs to discuss interesting cases in each trust. And to those that are familiar with the current renal patient care, the existing collaboration between the primary care, the GPs, going to the advanced kidney care clinic would depend on the patient's kidney function. So with Karen's explanation on equity, we would be covering all patients in different levels. And of course, we would be working along with this pathway to test eligible patients for genetic testing. All right, for linked role nurses, we already know that they're already part of a system that shares information to provide formal two-way communication between specialist nurses. Specifically for renal, this is not new. Renal nurses would be collaborating with CNSs for vascular access, anemia, the nutritionist, and so on. They would be involved in advocating renal genomics in both patient and practice. And of course, liaising genomics concerns for specific referrals to the renal genomics team. And of course, supporting inherited renal clinics with administrative tasks, such as consenting and similar to that. And we would be talking about cascade training as well moving forward. And of course, upscaling opportunities and advocating that there are education opportunities out there at the moment through Health Education England. And of course, keeping the Think Genetics conversation going on our area. So at the moment, we are currently developing an information leaflet that we would be sharing with clinicians. So it would include information such as what's the importance or significance of genomics in the healthcare in our renal patients. And it would also focus on initially on most common disorders such as PKD, Alport syndrome, and SRNS. And it would also have links to important forms that would be needed in each clinic, in each trust. So that would include the WGS testing and forms and type of results. So at the moment, our current update for awareness and education for patient and public, we have submitted an abstract to be included to introduce genomics in the upcoming UK Kidney Week on June. And we are already collaborating with other specific charities. And at the moment, with the support of the PDNs in GUICE, we have already started in introducing genomics to their upcoming renal course and study days. And we would like to mirror the same in other trusts along the region. All right, so I'm just emphasizing that in our website, Southeast Genomics, there are education and resources available for all different healthcare professionals. So please utilize that, and there will be links involved. And again, Health Education England is a good opportunity to start knowing about genomics and moving forward. And they have different modules and bite-sized learnings involved. And if you want to proceed or progress to more advanced in masters or postgraduate diplomas, they are for that. All right, so thank you. Please follow us on Twitter for latest updates. And I think it's time for Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ed. Thank you, Anya, for that overview and all the work that you've been doing to get sort of renal genomics off the ground and your renal genomics network development as well, which I think is going really, really well with a huge amount of enthusiasm and interest in the Southeast. And I think actually is, you know, sort of leading the way as well nationally. I think there's a lot of interest from people around the country and maybe, you know, people from other areas, because I can see there's quite a few people from outside our region might want to comment on that as well. So everybody has kept remarkably beautifully to time. So we're actually ahead of time. we have some time for questions and answers. We've just had one question in the chat, which I thought was worth, although it's been answered, I thought it's worth a bit of discussion. And if other people have questions, please do put them in the chat. Otherwise, we can definitely finish early and give people a little bit of time back. I never object to that. So Dick Sandford asked, following Mark's talk, he said, Mark, great to hear about the new neurogenetics clinic. And he wanted to ask about experience in developing skills to obtain consent for WGS. So actually, Dick, I can see you're there. Do you want to do you want to ask the question yourself, and then I think we'll get Mark to talk, and then I can certainly answer from a Southeast perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I mean, both the neurogenetics and renal talks were brilliant, and we've got similar sort of clinics in development and up and running now. And one of the things that obviously there aren't enough genetic counsellors to go around, and one of the things that we're developing are these clinical nurse specialist roles that are going to start taking on the role of consenting. And so one of the things that we're looking at is really how to develop the competencies around that. And there's a lot of material out there. So my question was just a very broad one, is obviously, firstly, your experience of those particular resources and how you feel that they sort of meet the competencies that you require, or what additional support and training do you feel you need to access? Because if we're going to be rolling this out more broadly across a wide range of specialties, there's going to be a lot of clinical nurse specialists who are going to need to develop this skill set. So I really look forward to your comments.
Mark, do you want to take that?
Sure. So at least from my experience, taking up these online courses were very, very helpful, especially in trying to navigate genomics in general, as well as, trying to get more information, or essentially it's just building up my knowledge. I mean, I'm familiar about, I mean, I'm a nurse, so I'll be able to make heads or tails about genes and DNA. But in terms of upskilling myself, gaining the confidence, in particular, in talking about genetics, genetic testing, a huge proportion of the knowledge was built by all of these online resources. Yeah. Of course, I took the extra leap of doing my postgraduate study in my master's in genomic medicine, and I completed that. I guess the other part of it, the flip side of it, is taking the time to practice, or get some kind of supervision, and I got that from when I took my module in genomic counseling. And as Heidi was one of our lecturers in there, and there were plenty of interactions on how you communicate with the patient, how you could engage patients who may have challenging personal family backgrounds. So there is that opportunity. The other thing is, for those who are really interested, or let's just say we just want to strike conversation about genomics and how they're going to apply it in their day-to-day practice, regardless whether they are nurses, midwives, allied healthcare professionals, drop us a message, because I've been doing that for the last couple of weeks since I started in my new post. Yesterday I had like an hour-long conversation about my role as a neurogenetic CNS, simply because they found me on LinkedIn. So there you go. And then that particular person, he is interested in upskilling in terms of offering genetic testing. He's a CNS of some sort, and there you go. It kind of just snowballs most of the time in these informal conversations.
Thank you, Mark. Ed, did you want to add anything with your own experience?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mark. There are a myriad of educational resources available to introduce genomics in any level of healthcare professionals, be it midwife, nurse, and so on. Senator Mark, I have done the genomic counseling module in St. George's, and I think it's very helpful to have that as well. And to those that are interested, they are fully funded through HEE. You just need to apply. And I think that's some way to support healthcare professionals who are interested. And of course, it would also discuss different methods in contacting patients So accessibility is also into place. So it will require you to converse with patients either virtually, personal, or through teams similar to this. So it's modernizing in some way.
Thank you, Ed. And Marie Kerwin has put in the chat that University of West England does a standalone 15 credit masters about genomics for nurses and midwives as well. So I think that there are lots of resources out there. But I think the other thing to emphasize, and I know Dick knows this, but is around the support from the individuals as well. So, clinical geneticists are not going away. Genetic counsellors are not going away. Hopefully we're creating some more genetic counsellors and maybe some more clinical geneticists as well. And we very much feel that it's part of our role to support people. But that's also what the GMSA is about. We have education and training leads, and we have our genomic champions, our genomic leads, who are also there and there to help with education as well. That's part of their role. I think Dick knows as well as I that the process of consent for whole genome sequencing, and I think many people on the call on the meeting will understand this, is quite painful and quite difficult. So one of the other things that we have been looking at is trying to develop an easier method of consenting. We're constrained because this is a national genomic program, National Genomic Service, and so whatever we do, we have to conform to that. But our paediatric lead, Nikhil, has been looking at trying to develop this as an electronic resource, and that's still work in progress. But we're hoping that we may get somewhere with that, with our IT lead as well, Mohammed. So there's stuff going on that we hope may make things simpler. But I do think the clinical nurse resource is a hugely important one and is going to be, for many of us, the way forward as well in genomics. So I'm really delighted actually that Mark and Ed were able to join us today just to demonstrate that. And I think we're quite lucky in the Southeast in having those individuals around. Dick, did you want to add anything to that from an East perspective?
Well, no, I think that covers it very well indeed. I think what we're trying to plan now is getting those initial core competencies in workplace experience, but then putting in a process of maintaining and developing those competencies so that it's very much just an integral part of a job plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, good. So Emma says it's changed her life having Mark start his clinic. So that's brilliant. Good. And I think that was another thing that I wanted to say was about all those educational resources. So I mentioned at the beginning that the GMSAs work very closely with the Genomics Education Programme. People may know that Health Education England is coming in under NHS England. The Genomics unit works very closely with the Genomics Education Programme. They are going to be integrated in the future. So there's a real recognition that workforce development is part of this whole program, and so we are pretty joined up at this level. So I hope people are able to access these resources. A lot of us are inputting into these resources, and as you can see, people are accessing these resources as well. So that's it's a very well supported program, and I absolutely recognise there are teething issues with the laboratory and the process of whole genome sequencing and consenting, but I think we're getting there and hopefully the alliances will support that. If there aren't any other questions, I wanted just to hand over to my colleague, Professor Sean Whittaker, who is going to, I think, just conclude and wrap up. So Sean, if you're there, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thanks, Frances. And thank you to all the participants for joining the webinar today. And I hope and trust that it's been appropriate for your clinical areas of interest. I think thanks to the speakers, they've given a great summary of real progress. And also, I think it highlights the challenges for us in embedding genomics into multiple parts of clinical pathways, multiple specialties, and indeed creating new pathways, which are absolutely essential, really important. As Francis mentioned earlier, please feedback. You've got the website details there and the Twitter. Please feel free to feedback constructive thoughts and responses. We'd be very grateful. And this webinar is going to be the first of a series. We hopefully will cover different areas of relevance for genomics. The webinar is available on the website, and so you can refresh your view of the subject matter if you wish, and also, of course, share with colleagues and advise them. The real importance, I'd like to thank Frances for her leadership of these transformation projects. You can see how it's a really multidisciplinary effort involving cutting across multiple areas of medicine. And it's a fabulous bit of progress. So thank you, Frances. But this ably supported by our program management team. And I particularly want to huge thanks to Makeda, because she's really tirelessly created this webinar today. And real great thanks, Makeda. And I hope you've got the appetite to do more, because it'll be really welcome. So with that, I'd like to wish everybody a good afternoon, and thank you for attending.
Thank you, everybody.